The topic for today's seminar is GI manifestations of acute graft versus host disease, the pathophysiology and management. So, graft versus host disease is a complication of allogenic hematopoietic stem cell transplant. So, let's just try to understand what are the basic concepts of stem cell transplant before we proceed to GVHD. So, what are the various indications for stem cell transplant? We see disorders like thalassemias, WBC disorders like lymphoma, leukemia, and bone marrow failure disorders like aplastic anemia, and also autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis. For all these conditions, the stem cell transplant is a potentially curative therapy. So, what are the steps in the stem cell transplant? So, it, depending on the type of transplant, the donor stem cells or stem cells from the self patient are harvested if, by giving GCSF and mobilizing the stem cells. These stem cells are harvested. They are cryopreserved and subsequently transfused to the recipient. So before the recipient receives the stem cells, the patient is given intensive chemotherapy, which is called as conditioning. So this is the minus 10 of transplant. So in this period, the patient is given intense chemotherapy, which destroys all the tumor cells, and also the patient gets myeloablated. So why is this conditioning chemotherapy given? This is first is to reduce the tumor burden of the patient. This is the therapy which takes care of the underlying disease process, and subsequently the stem cell transplant repopulates the marrow and helps in immune reconstitution. So the stem cells which are harvested are given to the patient, and subsequently usually takes around 2 weeks for the graft to get engrafted, the stem cells to get engrafted, and subsequently there is immune reconstitution, and the patient is now free of disease with the new hematopoietic stem cell. So if the, if donor is the donor himself is stem cells are harvested from the same patient, then it is called as autologous transplant. In this, the graft is only rescuing the depleted marrow. The chemotherapy is doing the work of taking care of the basic disease, and these stem cells are just repopulating the marrow. That is it. Whereas in allogenic transplant, it is slightly beyond that. The donor is a different person, and the stem cells harvested from this person, when they're given to the recipient, it performs two functions. One is to repopulate the marrow, and second, it also has an immune activity. This donor T cells will recognize the host tissues and mount an immune response, and that will lead to graft versus tumor disease. So before we understand what is graft versus tumor and graft versus host disease, the immune synapse is something which is formed by the T cell receptor and the antigen presenting cell and the recipient cell bearing the antigenic peptide in its MHC molecule. So this is the immune synapse. Normally, the host T cell and the donor T cell and the donor cell are from the same host, and they do not recognize each other as a foreign, and that doesn't lead to immune response. So if the patient if the donor T cells are exposed to self peptide and self HLA antigen, then it leads to tolerance and no immune activation. This happens in autologous transplant. Whereas in allogenic, the orange is represented by the donor and blue is represented by the recipient. So here the donor T cell recognizes the self. For example, there are T cells in the stem cell harvest. There are also some. Sorry, these are the stem cells. These are the T cells. So uh, in the stem cell harvested, the donor T cell do not mount a response against the its own donor's stem cells. So because it has self peptide and self HLA and leads to tolerance. However, If the patient is exposed to if the donor T cells are exposed to different cells, for example, recipient cells, which have non-self peptide, which it has not been exposed to prior, then it will mount an immune response, and these T cells get activated. And subsequently, if the patient has a different MHC also, then also there is alloreactivity or T cell activation. So in either of these two conditions, there is alloreactivity or activation of the donor T cells, which recognize the recipient cells as foreign and mounts a response. So this is just an example of a patient who underwent stem cell transplant recently. So this is the report of a stem cell harvest, which shows that the in 215 ml there were uh, 280 into 10 power and 10 power 8 number of total nucleated cells, out of which the CD34% or the stem cells are only 0.7%, 0.75%. So no matter how much apheresis has done after harvesting, still the amount of stem cells in the harvest which is being transfused consists only less than 1%, and rest of the 99% consists of various hematopoietic cells like T lymphocytes, mature donor T lymphocytes. So what is the role of these donor T lymphocytes apart from the stem cells? So these T cells recognize tumor antigens as foreign antigens and mount an immune response leading to graft versus tumor disease. So they also recognize the host normal tissues like gut, liver, and skin, and they mount an immune response against those organs as well. That is leading to what is called as graft versus host disease. And not only that, we should understand that the patients are completely immunodepleted, and they do not have any immunity against any possible infections that they might be acquiring after the intense chemotherapy. So these donor T cells will also help in fighting the infections until the host develops his own recipient develops his own immune system. So this is the importance of the T cells. So So as I said, T cell will mount an immune response towards a recipient who is not self, and if it is mounts against tumor cells, it is a desired effect called graft versus tumor, and if it mounts against on normal cells, it is an undesired graft versus host disease. So what is the role of mismatch? So uh, when we give chemotherapy to a patient, that will decrease the tumor burden, but still there is a residual disease, and this residual disease is taken care by the T cells which are being transplanted, that has graft versus tumor effect. So basis for alloreactivity in stem cell transplant is the expression of unique antigens by the recipient cells, which can be in the form of tumor antigens, or two different individuals have different proteins on their cells because of genetic polymorphism. This is considered as a minor HLA mismatch, and major HLA mismatch is because of the HLA molecules expressed on all the cells. So if we can take the example of a patient, then here it shows that a 14-year-old male patient is receiving stem cells from 17-year-old female sister. They are related, and they are, the match shows that the 6 out of 6 alleles are matching. So this is a perfect match. However, if a perfect match means that there is less amount of graft versus host disease, at the same time there is less amount of graft versus tumor disease also. So just to highlight the fact, this graph is taken from a study which shows probability of relapse of AML uh, in patients who have received stem cell from either an identical twin or an HLA identical sibling. We see that uh, when stem cells are taken from identical twin who share a lot of antigens, then there is less amount of graft versus host and graft versus tumor also, leading to high relapse. So some amount of alloreactivity is important for the success of the transplant. We can't just deplete the T cells which are responsible for graft versus host disease. Then that will not serve the purpose. It will rather destroy the primary purpose. So with this background, what is graft versus host disease? As I said, it is a complication of only allogenic stem cell transplant. And unlike in solid organ transplant, we only give liver or a kidney, but in this we are transplanting immune cells which are capable of mounting an immune response. It is usually a multi-system disorder, and it occurs when immune cells from non-identical donor, which is called the graft, recognizes the transplant recipient as foreign and initiate immune response that results in various disease manifestations in the transplant recipient. What are the risk factors for graft versus host disease? Uh, Sorry, older age of either the recipient or the host, sex mismatch, unrelated donor, HLA disparity, and the source of the stem cell will also determine the outcome of GVHD. The stem cell harvested from peripheral blood have high propensity rather than from bone marrow and least is with the umbilical cord stem cells. GVHD is of two types. It is uh, classically divided by 100 days mark, and classic acute is before 100 days, and classic chronic is after 100 days. Acute and chronic are not and there is considerable overlap, as you can see. So patient presenting in after 3 months also can have acute present with acute GVHD manifestations, and this this can extend up to 1 year. And although chronic is more than 100 days, it can start as early as 50 days and extend up to 5 years or more. So acute GVHD is a Th1 cell mediated immune response, which is driven by mature donor T cells and leading to abrupt onset of symptoms due to acute inflammation in the target organs. Whereas chronic has a different pathophysiology. It is a Th2 cell mediated humoral immune response because of complex interaction between B cells and T cells. These B cells are involved in fibrogenic pathways, and it leads to tissue destruction and fibrosis, leading to scarring and sicca symptoms over prolonged periods of time. So 100 days is what we have to remember. Less than 3 months is acute. GVHD is very common after allogenic hematopoietic stem cell transplant, and the prevalence has been reported from 30 to 70%. And if you take only GI GVHD, 50% of the patients undergoing stem cell transplant will develop gut manifestations. And the prevalence of chronic is 20 to 50%. And presence of GI GVHD itself reduces the survival. So GI GVHD leads to increased mortality compared to non-GI. And GVHD as such is a very common cause of mortality. Uh, After relapse of the disease, this is the second most common cause of mortality in patients undergoing stem cell transplant. Not just mortality, it leads to significant morbidity. It has been shown to reduce the quality of life as well. So it is a fairly common disease and uh, very important disease. So why does GVHD occur? So we know that the conditioning chemotherapy given to the recipient, it reduces the tumor bulk, and it also immunosuppresses the recipient so that he doesn't mount a response against the stem cells which he is getting, basically to prevent rejection. So this conditioning chemotherapy leads to massive damage in various organ systems along with the tumor cells, especially in the cells where there is rapid proliferation, like for example skin and GI tract. So this damage in the skin and GI tract especially leads to injury and release of damage associated molecular DAMs and PAMs, and inflammatory markers are released, which lead to the dendritic cells activation. So when there are a lot of immune dendritic cell activation, these antigen presenting cells activate the donor T cells. So this activation of the donor T cells leads to alloreactivity. This is normally prevented by regulatory T cells, but because of intense immunosuppression, the regulatory T cells are usually reduced. Patient is already immunosuppressed, and these donor T cells which we have transplanted, they will get activated because of these antigenic stimulation, and that leads to downstream signaling and inflammation because of various interleukins that results in tissue damage manifested as GVHD. What are the cardinal clinical features? GVHD can, in GI manifestations, it can affect. Most important organ system is the skin involvement. Usually, it happens. It is a maculopapular rash involving predominantly the palms and soles, and upper GI manifestations. It can start from a oral cavity. It can have patients can have mucositis, and patients can have odynophagia, esophagitis, and in upper GI symptoms, the patient can have mild symptoms like dyspepsia, anorexia, and nausea, and it can even progress up to GI bleed or severe pain abdomen. In lower GI manifestations, the diarrhea is the predominant symptom, and sometimes patients can have severe abdominal pain, bloody diarrhea, or rarely ileus also. In liver manifestations, cholestatic immune-mediated injury of the liver leads to cholestatic hyperbilirubinemia. So, GVHD is a clinical diagnosis predominantly. So, how do we know that the diarrhea occurring after stem cell transplant is because of GVHD? Uh, the important thing is to look at the organ system involvement. So, in this study, they found that skin and GI manifestations occurring simultaneously is the most common presentation, followed by GI involvement only, and followed by skin involvement only. So usually, GI involvement is very common. It occurs in 80 to 85% of all patients with GVHD who have GI involvement. Sorry, 82% of patients with acute GVHD have GI involvement, and these are the frequency of combination. So when we have diarrhea, we should also look for whether patient has skin disease, whether the patient has any bilirubin abnormality, and if they are occurring simultaneously, that gives a clue that it is likely GVHD. So this is the timeline. This is the chemotherapy that we have given to the recipient before transfusing the stem cells here. After that, it usually takes up to 2 weeks for the stem cells to get engrafted. So the first 2 weeks is a plastic phase where the patient marrow is depleted and his absolute neutrophil count comes down to less than 20-30. And here the patients are given a lot of antibiotics to prevent the infections. And during this time, whatever symptoms are there, mucositis, upper GI or lower GI, these symptoms are usually because of the chemotherapy rather than the graft versus host disease. Because here the donor T cells have not yet engrafted, so they cannot mount an immune response yet in the first 2 weeks. So whatever the manifestations like liver manifestations, skin manifestations, or diarrhea, these can happen due to graft versus host disease after the two weeks. The first 100 days is acute, and later it is chronic. So, how do we stage the disease clinically? Based on the extent of involvement of the skin, they have classified, they've graded as less than 25% body surface involvement as stage 1, 20 to 50%, 25 to 50 is grade 2, and more than 50% is grade 3. And if there is bulla formation or generalized erythroderma, it goes to stage 4. Similarly, the quantity of the bilirubin is also graded accordingly. And upper GI involvement, if there is persistent nausea, vomiting, or anorexia, then it is classified as grade 2. And lower GI, which is the most common manifestation, they are quantified based on the stool volume. If it is 500 to 1000 ml per day, it is stage 1, and up to 1500 is stage 2, and more than 1500 is stage 3. If there is severe abdominal pain, ileus, or grossly bloody stool, irrespective of the volume, it is stage 4. So this is the staging of target organs, and based on this, they've derived a grade. So if there is only stage 1 to 2 skin involvement, it is considered as grade 1. If there is stage 3 skin involvement and or stage 1 of any of the three organs, then it is grade 2. So when there is stage 2 to 3 of liver, upper GI or lower GI, then this goes to grade 3, and this warrants systemic immunosuppression. And stage 4 of any involvement is grade 4. So, as I said to you in the pathophysiology, that chronic GVHD is a uh, because of a fibrotic pathway activation leading to a lot of systemic sclerotic features. So, the most common organ affected is the skin, and there is this pigmentation, lichen planus, and sclerotic features. And in the nails, there is nail dystrophy, and in the mouth, there is a xerostomia, and because of the submucosal fibrosis, there is restricted mouth opening. And Sika syndrome, nail dystrophy, and in musculoskeletal, there is fasciitis, myositis, and joint stiffness and contractures. And coming to the GI manifestation, diarrhea is very uncommon in chronic GVHD. GI manifestations usually manifest as anorexia, weight loss, esophageal web or strictures requiring dilatation, and the patient can have jaundice in chronic GVHD also. So, what are the differential diagnoses? So, when we have a patient, when we receive a consult for diarrhea in a patient who has undergone stem cell transplant, so what are the different diagnoses that we have to consider and thoroughly evaluate and exclude them? First is, as expected in an immunosuppressed patient, the infections are important cause. They could be bacterial, viruses, or parasitic infections. So, Clostridium difficile, the patients are on broad spectrum antibiotics during the first 2 weeks after transplant for prophylaxis. And C. diff is a very important cause. However, the typical pseudomembranous appearance cannot be found in these immunosuppressed patients, and the leukocyte count which we use for uh, uh, diagnosis and staging of C. difficile, here it is not possible because the patients are usually neutropenic and they're recovering. So C. diff is a very important diagnosis that we have to exclude, and other bacteria uh, like Salmonella, Shigella, and other bacteria. Viruses are a very important cause. CMV is a common cause in immunotransplant stem cell transplant patients, and these are the other viruses. Giardia and Coccidian parasites and Entamoeba are also important cause. Next, we have to look at what the patient is receiving. We often ignore the non-immunosuppressive medications, which could be a culprit. Even antibiotics and antidiabetics and laxatives and even magnesium. Patient can be on magnesium. These all drugs can lead to diarrhea, and they should also be considered prior to getting the patient extensively investigated. And immunosuppressants, mycophenolate has highest propensity. It causes diarrhea in almost 20% of the patients taking mycophenolate. Others are less frequent causes, but mycophenolate is not commonly used until now after stem cell transplant. So uh, that is not a culprit in patients with the stem cell transplant, in contrast to solid organ transplant. Sometimes disease recurrence like lymphoma can also lead to diarrhea. That has to be considered. And finally, after thoroughly excluding all the causes, we have to consider the rare causes like PTLD, IBD, colon cancer, and malabsorption. GVHD, of course, is the disease of interest. So CMV colitis, we should get CMV DNA PCR done, and if the host and recipient are serodiscordant, then the patient should be started on prophylaxis with the antivirals as well. And this is an example of a patient where the biopsy from the ulcer, from the mucosa, the biopsy was done from the ulcer base as well as the ulcer mucosa. Incidentally, it was found that from the ulcer mucosa, there was a classical changes of acute GVHD. From the base, there was changes of CMV. So the important point is that they can coexist. Having GVHD doesn't provide protection against other infections, and they can coexist. So we have to look for other causes even when we know that it is a GVHD. So CMV, as we know, is diagnosed by characteristic inclusions, intranuclear intercytoplasmic inclusion bodies, and they can be confirmed on immunohistochemistry. So A neutropenic enterocolitis is another possibility in these patients. Usually, this occurs in patients. Let's understand the pathophysiology, where there is intense chemotherapy. 2 to 3 weeks after the chemotherapy, the patient is immunosuppressed, and there is also injury to the gut mucosa, and that leads to polymicrobial infection and the necrosis of the intestinal wall, leading to bacteremia, fungemia, sepsis, and high mortality. So this neutropenic enterocolitis is also was called as typhlitis because typhus means cecum, and cecum is a place where there is maximal distensibility and stasis of the stool can occur, where this damage of the bowel wall occurs. So this happens in patients with neutropenia, as the name suggests. So ANC should be less than 500. In contrast to GVHD, where the GVHD occurs when ANC is usually more than 500, that means the engraftment should have taken place. Then only these donor T cells have mounting the response. So this is immune mediated damage, whereas neutropenic enterocolitis is a direct microbial injury and sepsis. So it usually presents with fever and pain, which are uncommon in GVHD. So and bleeding PR. And usually by doing a CT, we can demonstrate the typical involvement of the ileocecal junction thickening. Uh, that is usually treated with IV antibiotics and may require surgery if it is severe. So now that we understood the differentials and the clinical features, how will we proceed with the investigative investigations? So the first line investigations obviously should be the stool examination, and the stool routine for cyst has to be sent, and it has to be taken care that all the special stains are also applied in these patients carefully to find the alternate etiology or the coexisting etiology. So these are the various parasites identified by special stains, and stool culture has to be done to look for Salmonella Shigella, and stool for CDTA has to be sent, and blood CMV PCR. Along with that, other PCR assays for other viruses like norovirus, etc., can also be sent. So, how what are the common causes? So, in a patient with diarrhea after a stem cell transplant, they found that C. difficile, enteric viruses, CMV, Giardia, and Cryptosporidium are the most common causes. So, if you want to investigate the patient thoroughly and have PCR assays, then we should consider PCR assays for these viruses, CDTA, blood CMV PCR, and the stool routine for 3 times. So this should be the first investigation that we advise in the patient. And if this turns out to be inconclusive, patient persists to have diarrhea, then we should proceed and do an endoscopy to establish the diagnosis of GBHD and also to rule out other causes. CT scan may be rarely indicated, especially when typhlitis is considered. Even after the endoscopy and imaging, if we remain inconclusive, then we have to reconsider the diagnosis of GVHD and look for all other rare causes. Like we should recheck whether it is because of the drug chemotherapy, and we can hold the drug, stop incriminating drug, and look for response. We should consider NEC, lactose intolerance, celiac. These are all very rare causes. This is just a repetition. These are the first line microbial testing: C. difficile, CMV, norovirus, and bacterial culture. This is actually derived from a paper with stem cell transplant. Sorry, a solid organ transplant. So the principles remain the same. If we find the any incriminating pathogen, then we treat accordingly. Otherwise, we repeat the stool examination, and blood test can be done to rule out bacterial overgrowth. And finally, in the last trial, they've advised that we should adjust the immunosuppressive medication and do a endoscopy or colonoscopy. So endoscopy, we have a lot of questions to answer. How safe it is? We are going to perform endoscopy in patients who are severely neutropenic and have severe pancytopenia. So how safe is an endoscopy? Does it lead to mucosal hematomas? Does it lead to bleeding, infection risk? Second, what is the timing? When should we do the endoscopy after the patient undergoes transplant? Whether it is in the first 2 weeks, third, fourth week, how many days can we wait after the patient has diarrhea? Second, will you do an upper GI endoscopy or will you do a colon or will you do both? Next is how many biopsies are going to take and whether you are going to take targeted biopsies or random biopsies, and what is the preferred site of biopsy. So let's try and answer these questions. So endoscope before those endoscopic appearances. So they have classified the endoscopic appearance. Grade one is considered as normal grade one is considered as normal mucosa. In grade two, there is usually spotted erythema. So this is grade two. In grade three, there are abscess lesions or focal erosions. And in grade 4, there are confluent defects or complete denudation of the mucosa, leading to ulcerations and bleeding. Coming to histopathological grading, the immune-mediated damage to the gut wall is predominantly seen in crypts where the stem cells are high, and the classical finding is that presence of apoptotic epithelial cell. So this is a hallmark finding in graft versus host disease, which is found in 90% of the patients, and this is considered only grade 1 if there are only apoptotic cells, epithelial cell. In addition, if there is individual crypt necrosis or crypt loss, then that is stage 2. If the crypt loss is more than 50%, then it is stage 3. And then when there is mucosal sloughing, then that is stage 4. So except for stage 4, the stage 1 to 3, it does not predict the response to treatment or mortality or morbidity. It doesn't correlate with that. And stage 1 to 3, the problem with histopathology is that the apoptotic epithelial cell can also be found in chemotherapy induced damage to the drug. So it is difficult to exclude, difficult to differentiate. And stage 4, of course, is diagnostic and is specific. So first 20 days, the chemotherapeutic effect on the gut are the predominant mechanism, and it is difficult to distinguish also. So we have to wait until 3 weeks before we consider GVHD as the cause and doing an endoscopy. And because of patchy and diffuse involvement, normal biopsy does not mean that there is absence of disease. So we have to start treatment empirically if the clinical suspicion is high. Also, in the biopsy, we have to clearly communicate to the pathologist to apply immunostains for CMV, HSV, other coexisting pathologies. So, how safe? This is a study which looked at the incidence of bleeding, infection, perforation, and mortality after endoscopy in patients with they compared non-thrombocytopenic and thrombocytopenic, non-neutropenic, and neutropenic. They found that the complications are very infrequent, and especially in neutropenic patients, the percentage adverse events increase. So we have to be careful in neutropenic patients and wait until the absolute neutrophil count is more than 500. So what is the preferred site? So I'm going to discuss some details of this paper in detail because this is the largest series of gut GVHD. We do not have much of prospective studies or randomized trials in this. This is a 122 patient. This group has included 122 patients in a retrospective manner uh, of patients who had diarrhea anytime between before 100 days of transplant, who have been referred from the hematologist for undergoing endoscopy. And all those patients have undergone upper GI, lower GI simultaneously, and only those patients who undergone both are included in this study. What they found that the median time to biopsy was after 33 days of transplant, and in all of them, the neutrophil count was more than 500, and the mean platelet count was 81,000. And if the platelet count was less than 50,000, they have transfused the platelet to reach the target. And in all of the patients, 4 to 6 biopsies at each site was taken, and no bowel preparation was used. And they made sure that the stool workup was negative, including CTTA prior to endoscopy, and they have performed immunostaining for CMV and HSV, and they have glandular apoptosis with no alternative etiology on biopsy at any one site is considered as diagnostic for graft versus host disease. And what they found was that the biopsy in any site was positive in 81% of the patient. The three sites being and normal mucosa. So the important finding in this study is that majority of the features patients had a combination of upper GI and lower GI symptoms. Diarrhea alone was in 20% of the patients, and most important is that see, around 60% of the patients had a normal mucosa, whether it be stomach, duodenum, or rectum. Majority of the patients have normal mucosa, but on doing blind biopsy, they found that patient had GVHD. So other grades, edema, erythema, nodularity, erosion, ulcer are in these frequencies. So the important thing is what they found was that the biopsies from rectosigmoid had highest sensitivity to detect GVHD when compared to the stomach or duodenum. Not just that, the 95% sensitivity was higher when compared to combined stomach and duodenal biopsy. So rectosigmoid gives the highest yield, and that should be the preferred site for biopsy. And they found subgroup analysis. They found that irrespective of whether the patient presents with upper GI manifestations or lower GI manifestations, the yield is high in rectosigmoid. And they did not find any association between the endoscopic appearance and the presence of GVHD or the severity at any site. So they found in their series a CMV in 3 patients, and IHC was positive in 2 out of 11 patients which they have performed, and inclusion bodies in additional 1 patient. All 3 patients had concurrent GVHD, so both immunosuppression for GVHD and antivirals for CMV were given to these patients. And in these patients, the skin biopsy was done prior to doing an endoscopy, and GI GVHD was found in 93% of patients with positive skin biopsy and 72% of those without skin biopsy also. Here, the skin biopsy might have been done very early and might have missed GVHD, which was later found in subsequent endoscopic biopsies. So what should be our approach? Before endoscopy, we have to ensure that the patient has these targets. Patient bowel preparation was found to be associated with increased mortality, and it was advised against that. No antibiotic prophylaxis, especially for this procedure, needs to be given. Patient are already on broad spectrum antibiotics. And endoscopic approach for diarrhea predominant disease, we can first do a lower GI alone. We do a colonoscopy alone. We advance the scope to furthest proximal extent, and we take biopsies of any discrete lesions that we find and random biopsies from normal mucosa from each segment, multiple biopsies. And if this is non-diagnostic, then we call back the patient and do an upper GI endoscopy with the biopsies from each anatomic segment. And uh, vice versa, if the patient presents with upper GA, we do first upper GA, and if the biopsy is non-conclusive, then we proceed to colonoscopy. So the other they do not recommend performing simultaneous upper and lower GI endoscopy. And post endoscopy, we have to clearly tell the pathologist what are the differentials that we are considering and ask them to perform special stains. And we have to monitor the response to treatment in patients with GVHD started on steroids. And if the patient loses the response or has recurrence of symptoms, we should consider repeat endoscopy. So this is a flow chart. First, we have to review the medication, assess for infectious etiologies, and rule them out. And once have excluded all other causes and having high GVHD as a high contender, if there is very high suspicion, then you have to start the treatment before waiting for the endoscopy biopsy. Is to start the patient on steroids and then go for confirmatory testing. As I said, if upper GA symptoms predominantly upper GA and biopsy, and if it is still the persistent concern, it was non-diagnostic, we proceed to do other biopsy. So these were the questions which we put forward before we started with endoscopy. Let's see if we answered all of them. Safety, we found that it was very safe, almost less than 1% complications, except for in neutropenic patients, it was 4%. In timing, first 3 weeks, the GI toxicity of chemotherapy is the predominant cause, and it is difficult to distinguish. So it is usually considered after 3 weeks of transplant. So it has to be either one, it should be based on a predominant system involvement. It has to be sequential rather than simultaneous. And we have to biopsy both abnormal and normal mucosa, because we found that in that study 65% of GI-GVHD had normal mucosa. And preferred site, highest yield was seen in the rectosigmoid. The rectosigmoid is the highest yield, and in upper GI they found that the antrum had high yield. And ASGA recommends multiple biopsies. Even these group also recommend multiple biopsies from each segment of upper GI or colon, because of patchy and diffuse involvement of the disease. So the role of imaging is limited in acute GVHD. They have non-specific findings of bowel wall thickening and are of limited clinical utility, except in one or two situations. So usually the CT which are done shows the mucosal enhancement in thickened bowel segment. It can be focal or diffuse, and small intestine involvement alone occurs in 75% of patients with GVHD, and then we can exclude the C. difficile colitis, and focal thickening of the ileum and the right column, which is the site for typhlitis or neutrophilic enterocolitis. So that leads us to suspecting NEC as the cause. And usually the degree of thickening is moderate in acute GVHD, but severe thickening can occur if there is a superimposed infection or there is necrosis. So diagnosis is mainly on clinical grounds because of the classical multi-system involvement of diarrhea with maculopapular rash or cholestatic liver injury. Usually happens 2 to 3 weeks after stem cell transplant, and we have to thoroughly exclude alternative diagnosis, and we should try and establish the diagnosis using tissue biopsy. But however, it is not necessary for starting the treatment. So coming to the last part of the seminar, how do we manage these patients? Supportive care, like for any other patient with diarrhea, these patients are prone to severe dehydration and malabsorption. So we should avoid using antidiarrheal agents in these patients, because we are considering infection, and only after we are sure that all the infections are thoroughly excluded for symptom control should we use loperamide. Octreotide is commonly used in this dosage, and all the macro and micronutrient deficiencies should be corrected. GA bleed was found to be present only in 9% of the patients after stem cell transplant. Out of this, only 2% had uh, uh, significant GI bleed. Typically, it is a diffuse mucosal oozing, and it is because of the underlying thrombocytopenia and coagulopathy. However, we still have to do an endoscopy to exclude other treatable causes, and we treat them with steroids and acid suppression. So the GVHD treatment, because the donor T cells and immune mediated damage is the cause. So immunosuppression has been considered the cornerstone of treatment. However, when we globally suppress the T cells, then that leads to a lot of problems with opportunistic infections, organ toxicity, and there is chance that these T cells, which are supposed to mount a response against tumor cells also, so there is a risk of reducing the graft versus tumor effect also. However, these are the mainstream treatment molecules. So we give in prophylaxis, they usually give calcineurin inhibitors without methotrexate, and in the treatment we give systemic corticosteroids for uh, grade 2 and above, and usually for grade 1 we give topical steroids only. However, the need of the hour is immunomodulation, where we should increase the regulatory T cells, decrease the effector T cells, and decrease the amount of cytokine profiling. That will lead to specifically reducing the GVHD, at the same time not causing toxicity or increasing the graft versus tumor disease. So The prophylactic GVHD prophylaxis begins in the first one day one or day two of stem cell transplant, and single agent methotrexate was the standard of care because of apart from folate antagonism, it has multiple other effects which can prevent GVHD. Subsequently, calcineurin inhibitors were found to be superior to methotrexate, and they were used as a combination, cyclosporin with methotrexate or tacrolimus with methotrexate. So currently, this is the regimen which is being followed, and these have combination of these were shown to have decreased the incidence of GVHD, decreased the steroid dose required, and however, even after using tacrolimus and methotrexate, the efficacy still remains suboptimal and with a lot of side effects. The search for better agents is going on, and one immunomodulatory mechanism that is explored is giving cyclophosphamide after transplant. Usually, cyclophosphamide is given pre-transplant as a part of conditioning chemotherapy, but after transplant, uh, there is a important concept that the alloreactive T cells proliferate around day 3 and day 4. However, the non-alloreactive T regulatory cells proliferate later on in the course. So they have timed the cyclophosphamide around this time where they will selectively damage the alloreactive T cells and preserve the T regulatory cells. So resulting in survival of the T reg cells and destruction of the alloreactive T cells. And in phase 2 trial, they have found to be beneficial. So the treatment is usually steroids. If it is limited disease, then it is topical. If it is moderate to severe, then we usually give 1 to 2 milligram per kg of steroid and a taper over prolonged period. The efficacy is only 50%, and we all know the problems with prolonged immunosuppression. So the search for steroid sparing agents has been there, and JAK inhibition was a strategy that was utilized. And JAK-STAT pathways regulate cell division, cell death, and immunity. And these are the non-receptor tyrosine kinases, which result in T cell activation and interleukin 6 signaling. And JAK inhibition was found to have improved the GVHD symptoms in mice and human experiment by reducing the cytokines and T cell activation and infiltration. And for these results, it has been recently approved for steroid refractory GVHD in 2019. Ruxolitinib is the drug. Ruxolitinib, sorry. So, what about the patients who do not respond to steroid? So, in steroid refractory, the patients are considered when there is disease progression after 3 days or there is no improvement in 7 to 14 days. And this is associated with high mortality and decreased response to second line agents. So, there is a quest to develop biomarkers which can predict the response. When there is intestinal injury, there are some mediators released, for example, REC3 alpha, and there are some markers of T cell activation like interleukin 1R. So these markers have been found to, in various combinations, have been found to predict a decreased treatment response and increased mortality. So these are the two groups which we before starting steroid, we know that these are the high risk patients. After starting steroid, if they don't respond, they are considered steroid refractory, and these are the high risk cohort. So how do we manage this high risk cohort? So there is no standard of care for steroid refractory or high risk acute GVHD. There are a lot of second line treatments. I'm not going into the details, but they include anti-TNF antibodies, anti-thymocyte globulin, sirolimus, or MMF. And newer therapies, apart from ruxolitinib, which I've told, there is also interest in extracorporeal photophoresis and mesenchymal stem cell infusion. What is of interest to gastroenterologists is the role of FMT. So, in the pathogenesis of acute GVHD, what was observed was that there is a lot of gut dysbiosis. There is a decrease in the stool microbial diversity, which occurs in approximately 70% of the patients after stem cell transplant. And this has corresponded with the incidence of GVHD also. And why does this occur? Decrease in the diversity because of the intense conditioning chemotherapy that we give, the broad spectrum antibiotics given in the first 2 weeks of aplastic phase until the that leads to a lot of gut dysbiosis and also the immunosuppressive drugs. And not just that, even the in transfusion of foreign T cells also lead to gut dysbiosis, and this is more common in GI GVHD. And they found that low microbial diversity has been associated with high probability of transplant related mortality. So after these findings, they have explored the role of fecal microbiota transplantation, and these were this is a graphical abstract showing that after the stem cell transplant, there was loss of diversity because of various drugs, and there was increase in the enterococci, lactobacillus, and decrease in the clostridials, and that was corresponding with the GVHD incidence. And once the patient's given FMT, the diversity was restored, and it increased in the overall survival. So in case series, that was found that these are the FMT sessions. So when they gave the FMT session, the stool volume was reduced, and not just that, correspondingly, uh, this is the stool diversity, decrease in the stool diversity. After giving stem cell transplant, the diversity has increased, and so it is a promising therapy, and there are no trials as of now, but they are underway. So to summarize, GIT is the most commonly affected organ in GVHD, and indicates poor prognosis. It is mainly a clinical diagnosis. We have to thoroughly consider and exclude infectious and drug-related causes. In biopsies, apoptotic cells are the hallmark finding, and GVHD prophylaxis is always better, and we have to start it on day one. And corticosteroids remain the cornerstone of treatment. And risk stratification using serum biomarkers and immunomodulatory mechanisms are an area of active research, and FMT appears to be a promising approach to managing the patients with the refractory GVHD. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah. So, Bhaskar, your comments?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jatin, for a very nice presentation on GVHD. I just want to highlight some clinical points. In when we get a consult for a GVHD from suspicion of GVHD from a hemat or stem cell transplant center, the as he highlighted, the diarrhea, which is mostly because of acute GVHD, we'll see after the 2 weeks of stem cell transplantation, and that the diarrhea is typically large voluminous, and sometimes there is a more protein loss. Sometimes we can, even in severe cases, we can see a ropey material on the diarrhea, and patient will have typically liquid stool volumes more than 1 liter, which is also a bad prognostic marker if patient having such a high volume of stools. And before diagnosing acute GVHD, as we have to rule out all infections. They can be overlap of infection with CMV plus GVHD or Clostridium difficile with GVHD. So we need to cover all the infectious causes also. And remember, we want to highlight GVHD liver also, because GVHD liver, increasing bilirubin in patients of GVHD is a poor prognostic marker and poor response to treatment. And before that, we also need to rule out DILI infectious causes in patients of GVHD liver. And as the involvement of GVHD is patchy, and even the endoscopy biopsy glucose is normal. The endoscopy biopsies may not reveal GVHD, so there is a need for markers. Like he highlighted some serum markers, REC3 and ST2, but even there are promising fecal markers. We are upcoming that fecal calprotectin. It has shown in even in predicting the occurrence of GVHD treatment response also, and other fecal biomarkers like alpha-1 antitrypsin. And regarding my comment regarding FMT in setting of an acute GVHD which is non-response to initial treatment, it is very early. We have only case series. We need to look for a more large number of studies involving more number of
नहीं,
patients.
FMT उसमें आया है PD-1 थेरेपी रेजिस्टेंस को रिमूव करने के लिए, साइंस में जो आया है.
Sir, मतलब safety is also a concern in such patients of immunosuppression. So as a मतलब PD-1 सर मतलब मैंने आर्टिकल पढ़ा नहीं.
Okay.
Jatin, how different is the presentations of GVHD with other transplants, because you focus predominantly on the stem cell transplant? Is there any difference, or are they the same?
So, only after the stem cell transplant does the GVHD occurs. Usually after solid organ transplant, I have not read much. So,
There's a lot of data published on solid organs, say liver transplant or others, like, so it's there, like renal transplant. You get so it's not very frequent, but we're getting consultations from the nephrologists about GVHD. So did you come across anything on that?
sir, I've restricted to stem cell transplant. I'll have to read about it.
Any role of liver biopsy?
Sir, liver biopsy can be done, sir, when there is isolated liver involvement. Then we do not have any other organ to establish a diagnosis. So they have found the similar immune-mediated injury and apoptotic cells even in the liver biopsy. But before doing that, we have to rule out the drug-induced causes and also reactivation, viral reactivation. And the clinical picture is like predominantly conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. And even in the liver biopsy, there is bile duct injury, which is immune-mediated. So in isolated liver involvement, we may end up doing liver biopsy, which is only in 1%, 3% of the patients.
Jatin, I have one question.
So
Why is the immune-mediated injury confined to only skin, bowel, and liver in GVHD?
So because these are the organs which have highest concentration of the dendritic cells and which are the antigen presenting cell. If you can remember the pathology, I told that the conditioning regimen destroys the cells, releases a lot of dams. So these are recognized by the antigen presenting cells and they activate the T cells. So where the dendritic cells are more concentrated, they are going to activate the T cells more, and hence the uh, involvement of skin, gut, and liver are more common.
So is it more common as clinical presentation? Like every organ
Or-
could be involved, na? It's
Yeah,
not that
because
what
per-
Piyush is raising a very important point. So any organ can be involved. It's only the symptoms which are what we're seeing in terms of frequency, as that's more is as a clinical presentation. No?
So, but the severity of immune-mediated damage is also high in these organs. That is why they are presenting with predominant symptoms. They are not. The destruction is not in the other systems.
No, is it, have you gone through the text saying that there is no on biopsy, there is no destruction,
No,
or
sir.
it just
I have
is
not
because
come
there are no
across.
symptoms? Symptoms doesn't mean there is damage not going on.
Okay.
Sir, the second reason could be the stem cells in skin and gut. So these are the highly proliferating organs, and the damage to the stem cells could lead to the manifestations limited to these organs, maybe because liver involvement is less common as compared to gut and skin. So that could be the another reason.
Saurabh, I think this is a right explanation that skin and GI tract are replicating cells, therefore they are more likely to get damaged. And there's also one of the explanation for apoptotic bodies, because once there's a rapid replication, then the telomere, which are there at the end of chromosomes, they get shortened in length. Normal telomere is about more than 2,000 base pairs. So as the cell replicate, every cell has a finite, every stem cell has finite replication capacity. Once they replicate 50, 60 times, they die off. Then they show apoptotic bodies. With increasing rate of replication, the telomeres get shortened, and that's one of the reasons that cells, the capacity of stem cells decreases. Therefore, they're not able to match up with the amount of loss, and therefore there's a damage to intestine and the skin. And that also one of the important things to look at in terms of the telomere length. It is found that the length of telomere is low in these patients.
So regarding GVHD after solid organ transplant, After solid organ transplant, there are two ways that GVHD can occur, which is an antibody mediated, which is mostly limited to the hemolysis because of donor antibodies react with the recipient host cells, and another form is cellular type, like we demonstrated in GVHD after stem cell transplant, which is a rare manifestation. So as we often see in after stem cell transplant, after solid organ transplant, it is usually mild forms GVHD. Seen more of it is rejection of the graft. We'll often see. And regarding one question by Dr. Mota, Srikant Mota, the age, how age is a risk factor. It is not exactly the age, the mismatch between the
Yes.
recipient and donor age that that
Okay, sir.
that predisposes to the more chances of GVHD.
So, sir, I think Jatin did a good job, and he went through almost all the important aspects which are related to us while we receive a consultation or we are asked to evaluate a patient of stem cell transplantation who has diarrhea. And I would also like to thank Dr. Rishi Dhawan from hematology. We took advice from him also for this seminar. And any other questions?
Saurav,
Sir.
hello.
Yes, sir.
I want to echo your thoughts on that. That Jatin did a wonderful seminar. The slides were very clean and very innovative. So
Yes,
I
sir.
think it was a very good seminar in the terms, the content delivery, the thought process, the sequence of events. So it's like more like a story, starting from why it happens, then what manifestations. So it went very well.
Yes, sir.
Very good, Jatin.
Thank
Wonderful
you, sir.
work.